The Code 3. A live podcast sponsored by the Marin Fire History Group. All about the history of the fire service in Marin County, California. And now your host, retired Fire Chief Bill Lellis.
Good day, and welcome to the Marin County Fire Chief's historical website. Today's program is kind of a follow-up to last month's program on the hook and ladder. So we will be talking about aerial ladders, and the history of the aerial ladder actually had its start here in the Bay Area. This is this fire you're seeing now is in San Rafael in the late 1950s, and Chief Bob Marcucci of San Rafael has written a wonderful report and story on this that is on the web. And if you needed any further information on this particular fire, I recommend strongly that you visit and read this program by Chief Marcucci. A new term is about to enter our vocabulary, and it's called skyscrapers. Today we call these high-rises, and a high-rise is basically anything with a floor above 75 feet where we would park our apparatus. They're very challenging fires. In the early days, these large buildings were not built for life safety. They were just built for office space, mostly by insurance companies and firemen. Keep in mind now, in the 1870s and 80s, when these were being built, we had no breathing apparatus. So once firemen entered these buildings, they were really, truly challenging their own life safety. So here we have in 1896, we have a 312-foot building up into the clouds. And as I said, is what we call a high-rise. These high-rises were beyond the reach of the standard extension ladder, 45-footer. In one case, San Francisco has a 65-foot extension ladder. It takes 6 to 8 men to raise it. Still would not reach the upper windows and roof of these high-rises. This particular photo was taken in 1906 in April, the earthquake, and the building to your left and the soldiers are about to dynamite that building in hopes to make a fire break to save what part of the city they could from this devastating conflagration. As I said, the firemen were entering these high-rise buildings. Standpipes were kind of on the outside fire escape of these high-rises. Keep in mind, life safety was not the issue here yet until after a tragic fire in 1911 did the high-rises get attention as far as life safety of getting people out of these buildings. But firemen and civilians were both injured on fires in these concrete buildings. Applying water from the exterior without putting firemen in harm's way was the question in the 1850s. A gentleman by the name Abner Greenleaf developed what is called a water tower. And most fire departments of any size on the East Coast and the West Coast, like Los Angeles and San Francisco, would have at least one of these water towers, and probably a couple of them. What it allowed the fire service to do is raise these water towers with nozzles that can flow 2,000 gallons a minute and get very, very close to the building. In other words, they could be within 10 feet of the building or a window and apply their water and rotate it across the face of the building. These water towers were built by Mr. Greenleaf gets credit out of Baltimore for creating the first one, which was purchased by the New York City Fire Department. And a chief out of Kansas City called Hale, he also would take this water tower and make additions to it and improvements of it. But San Francisco, I believe, still has one of the largest water towers in its historical museum in the city. And Los Angeles Fire Department also has a number of these water towers. And I'll say it up right up front now, after this program, if you want to visit two great sites, I recommend you visit the San Francisco Fire Department Historical Site and the Los Angeles City Fire Department's historical site. Some incredible history here on the West Coast. But with every advancement in the fire service, there are sometimes we have what we call a fallback. In the case of the Scott Uda ladder, it was tragic. As you can see from the headlines in the newspaper in New York City, the ladder, seven guys were on the ladder. The ladder broke, and they all fell and killed 3 of them instantly. This ladder was, the coroner's report indicated that the pine wood it was made out of was rotten, and it was a 65-footer. So this is how this was developed by an Italian engineer. Mrs. Scott was a music teacher in Chicago, and somehow got the rights to sell this ladder here in North America. And she sold it, and the Boston Fire Department was the first one to take it on and test it and keep it in service for a long time. So you will see a lot of these Scott ladders in the history books. What you're looking at, it looks like a pile of lumber going to the dump, but you can see the crank in the middle. And what happened as you started to crank it, the back wheel moves underneath itself for support, and the ladder is then raised to it. But you can't move it. And once you set it, it wasn't going to be like the up-and-coming new ladder. So while thousands of New Yorkers looked on, 7 firefighters reluctantly began to climb this 100-foot ladder. A slight wind came up. There was a twist of the ladder, a loud crack, and 7 men were falling. 3 would die instantly. And the sad part about the 3 people who died were survivors of the Civil War. It was kind of a shame. And the autopsy proved that the ladder was, again, the pine was rotten. So help was on the way. In 1866, the San Francisco Fire Department is transforming from a volunteer to a paid department. They would need the best engines of the time, and the commission would order 5 steam engines from the East Coast. The gentleman assigned to bring those steamers to the West Coast was at one time a volunteer with the Fire Department of New York for 7 years. He then was an engineer with the steam engine company in Nashua, New Hampshire, who built over 500 steam engines, delivered all over the world. This 36-year-old engineer was given the task of transporting and training the members of the San Francisco Fire Department on these new powerful engines. And that would take almost half a year to bring them up to running power. In those days, in the 1860s, railroad didn't come to San Francisco. Everything had to go down the East Coast, get on a railroad at the Isthmus of Panama, and go across the Isthmus to the Pacific side of the country, get on a boat, and come on up to San Francisco. That gentleman's name was Daniel D. Hayes. He was, after training the firemen, he was offered a new job with San Francisco as chief mechanic, which he held for 14 years. The stamp you see next to is the first stamp from England. It is a symbol of the first steam engine built in 1830. And believe it or not, this steam engine could produce over 2,000 gallons per minute, but the British Fire Service would not accept it, and they went back to hand pumps. It took them 3 years to finally decide to put this steam engine into service. And the same was going to happen with Mr. Hayes' aerial ladder in San Francisco. Mr. Hayes' ladder was a ladder that was spring operated, and you can see the cranks up high. 2 firemen would turn those cranks, and the ladder would be in service in less than a minute. The first ladder he built was 65 foot, and it had a turntable, which meant it could rotate 360 degrees and pick up any window or roof line that the fireman needed. But again, it was new, and the fire chief at the time was reluctant to bring it and put it in service. It was housed properly, but never used for a couple years until finally a large working fire. They pulled it out, and it performed magnificently. But again, something new is challenging to us, and we are reluctant to use it. So there he is. He lived to be 90 years old. He lived in the Oakland. He did work for San Francisco for 14 years, went to Los Angeles, and worked for them making aerial equipment, and then left Los Angeles to take up his manufacturing of these ladders. He sold the rights of this ladder to American LaFrance. So you will see in the history books the Hayes / American LaFrance aerial apparatus, and they called it mostly. It also was a term called the escape ladder. It was kind of like an emergency escape. That's how they looked at it when it first came onto the scene. And in 1957, the San Rafael Fire Department ordered the county's first aerial ladder. It was a 100-foot American LaFrance. This photo is a kind of a facsimile of that aerial equipment, and it was housed down at Station 2, and just barely fit in the station. But that was the first one, and this was the one that came about after that large fire we saw on the first slide. They ordered this ladder along with a new 1250 pumper. Here's one built by an Alto Fire Protection District, which is now part of the Southern Marin. The fire chief was Carl Heinen, and Carl Heinen was a master machinist. He could do anything, and what he did is he bought this 1944 Seagraves and converted it to an aerial, a 50-foot aerial, that passed all of the ISO tests. So it sat there, and it was quite a significant, and it was all built by his design, and the firemen on duty were the ones that put it in service and built it. And I remember when they built it, it was quite a story, and it cost $4,000 to bring it to working condition. Kenfield, it was called short and tall. According to the literature, this was the shortest aerial ever built. As you can see, the wheelbase is quite tight, and it was 1960, 75-foot Peter Persh. It was the 1,000-gallon per minute pumper, single stage. It was after it was done, it was donated to the Santa Rosa Fire Academy in 2000. And where it is now, I don't know, but I'm sure it's given someone some fun to play with it if it's not at the academy. Tiburon bought a second-hand ladder, a 1949 Persh, 65-foot, from Richland, Washington. It was sold to a San Francisco man who bought it for his son in his birthday. He must have had one big backyard to have this as a toy. When my kids, I only bought them Hot Wheels. That was their fire truck on their birthdays. This is quite significant, quite a story. The story of how it came down the highway from Washington, you will be seeing in a future broadcast. It's quite a humorous story, the two guys who went up and got this and brought it down. In the late 50s, a Chicago fire commissioner saw a tree trimming operation, and out of a bucket. He thought that this would work in the fire service, and you guessed it, the snorkel was born. The snorkel can go up, over, and down, around apparatus. These snorkels were manufactured by a half a dozen companies across America. In 1966, Sausalito, 65-foot high ranger, was built on an International Van Pelt body. This aerial in Sausalito was used for all kinds of occasions, putting up banners, giving kids and dignitaries a ride. But it is still where it happened. What happened to it history-wise, we don't know. Novato, 85-foot crown snorkel with a pierced body. It held a Detroit AB 71 engine with a 1250 gallon per minute pumper. When its service was done, it was sold to Petaluma, and when Petaluma the fire department was done with it, they sold it to a tree company. So the history of the aerial ladder in America actually starts in San Francisco by that gentleman by the name of Daniel D. Hayes, who lived to be 90 years old. I found this cartoon and I thought it was apropos here. Truckers just can't enter heaven like everybody else. I think it's kind of makes a statement. And I want to thank you for watching, and please be safe. And Mr. Producer, do we have any questions from the viewers?
I thought you would never ask, sir. We do actually have one. From Leslie in Utah. He is with the Volunteer Castle Valley Fire Protection District up there in Utah. His grandchildren live in Central Marin. They've been advised by the fire marshal that a neighbor's tree that overhangs the property is too close and needs to be cut back. The neighbor has told them it will cost $480 to get it done. Despite where they live, it's a financial burden to do this. What suggestions might you have, sir?
Well, this is an age-old question. What is a fire hazard? Is it a fire hazard? In a true sense of the word, no, it's not a fire hazard. But if a wildland fire should come through the area of the department, like it has been coming through here in the state of California, anything within 10 feet or 20 foot of a house or a roof line is a potential hazard. And the recommendation, I'm sure, of the Central Marin Fire Marshal would be a recommendation to have that tree removed off the roof by at least 10 feet and away from chimneys. But again, it's a recommendation. I don't believe the fire marshal would have the authority, unless it's in city ordinances or district ordinances, that would make anyone remove the tree. This would end up being a civil matter between the two neighbors. But other than that, it's not a fire hazard. A lot of people want to call it fire hazard, but it's not a fire hazard. It's a nuisance and a potential danger to the homeowners on both sides of that fence. So I hope that answers the question. And anything else, Mr. Producer?
No, I don't believe so, sir.
Okay, again, thanks for watching. Be safe out there. Until next time, be good.